Hello, and welcome to EURAXESS Smart Talks.
The Smart Talks podcast series is an EU-funded EURAXESS project which provides information and assistance to researchers at any career stage.
EURAXESS supports the EU research area in its ambition to create a single borderless market for research, innovation and technology in the EU.
We support researchers in mobility, careers within and outside academia, innovation and entrepreneurship.
We strive to increase scientific collaboration between Europe and the world. Hi, I'm Daria, a senior expert at EURAXESS National Contact Point in Latvia.
And I'm Jovan, a teaching and research assistant from the Faculty of Mechanical Engineering in Niš, Serbia.
And you are listening to the EURAXESS Smart Talks podcast. And now we are proceeding with the Brian Cahill, who is a representative of ReMO Action and Pattern project here and also deals heavily with mental health for researchers and research managers. So Brian, let's start from the very beginning of your initial motivation to be in this topic. As we discussed with you right now, like before we started the interview, you also referred to the mobility, you as a researchers, as the best time in your life. And many researchers refer to mobility as a enormous effort from them to understand different culture, different mentalities, different institutional, historical issues, why it is happening like that and not as I'm accustomed to. So maybe a little bit into this topic, how initially you get interested in it.
Well, about 10 years ago, I was the chair of the Marie Curie Alumni Association, and I had a lot of contact with early career researchers who were engaging in international mobility, and in some ways you become a magnet for researchers who have issues with their fellowship, with their supervisor, and so on. So through this time, you feel a responsibility because people contact you, and generally we had kind of both PhD candidates and doctoral networks as well as postdoctoral fellows. And particularly with the PhD candidates, because there is a 3-year time limit for the funding for the Marie Curie doctoral networks in most countries in Europe, this is not enough to finish your PhD. And so this very often creates a problem towards the end of these 3 years, particularly with international researchers who may be perceived as earning very well, but once you're not earning anymore, kind of your savings get eaten up, you become kind of much more precarious. And so this is something which was really, for me, it was something that you go around as chair of the association, you go maybe to a conference on microfluidics and you see kind of somebody who has a poster with Marie Curie kind of logo on it, and so you go up and you talk to them, and then maybe 6, 7, 8, 9 months later, the same people send you an email to you kind of about kind of their funding running out, and you have a kind of personal connection. It's not neutral. You're not an administrator, and it's a very difficult problem. And you can also see how it's a difficult problem for the supervisors because the supervisor very often doesn't have the funding to help this person. So this was really something that came a lot, even in kind of, if I went to information meetings on the MSCA doctoral networks, very often the audience would put their hands up and they'd point this out from the very beginning. I know, so this was one thing, but it was also, there were a lot of issues with conflict between the fellows and their supervisors. And this is common in any work situation where you may have problems with your boss, but I think the dependency of researchers on their boss, particularly for this reason, where the boss is responsible for funding, for acquiring funding, for clearing contracts, and is perceived as being able to choose which researcher from the group to prolong and which not. This leads to kind of very difficult dynamics. And so this is something where definitely the project basis of the research, how research is funded, leads to kind of relationships between researchers and their boss being not always as positive as they should be. And this was something that led to the Marie Curie actions introducing the MSCA Guidelines on Supervision. And so this was something that was carried out in collaboration with the Marie Curie Alumni Association. And so this was real kind of a policy win for our association, that we could lobby for something like that to be adopted by the European Commission.
Oh, that sounds great and very reasonable. Referring to what you said about the initial idea that researchers' mental health, due to publish or perish culture, due to heavily competitive ecosystem, due to mobility and different and suffering through a new system, new knowledge, new understanding of how it all works, due also to let's be honest, funding, because all the national funding schemes, Horizon Europe funding scheme is challenging. It's a huge challenge. It's another way of seeing things, putting them together and discussing them on the pages of your proposal. So it's a huge workload, and on the mental health it definitely has its impact. So if we are talking about ReMO COST Action, as I understand, of course, it wasn't that like a very classical thing that we are coming together just for publishing papers in highly ranked journals and thank you very much for collaboration. It was something different. Can you explain, and maybe some also like lessons that you learned from this kind of cost action?
That really, it was a cost action that was very much focused on achieving impact, but at different levels, at the level of policy level, on the European level, but also at national levels, but and kind of the institutional level, with kind of engaging with institutions and reaching out to research managers, researchers, kind of people who had responsibility for setting institutional practices, as well as the individual level. So how to engage early career researchers, how to engage practitioners who run mentoring programs, who set up the best practices within the institutions. So we really set it up at these 3 different levels. And of course, we wanted to publish papers and do stuff like this, but that wasn't the primary focus of the cost action. Cost action was mainly focused on how to build a network that could go beyond just raising awareness of researcher mental health, so to move on to really identify best practices and to work as a sort of community of practice where we could really engage with best practices for supporting researcher mental health.
Was it more on the individual level, or you were focusing more on institutional level and setting up, the agenda for this kind of topic?
It's kind of, I think, within the kind of a cost action where you can't really very closely concentrate on one institution, that the institutional level really changing a research institution around is a long-term project. It takes, I think we ran a webinar with one of the vice presidents of the University of Toronto who had implemented a research culture program, and he described it as a 20-year project. So yeah. I think that we focus maybe on kind of in the Autonomous University of Barcelona, there's a project called the Third Half where they kind of integrate in teaching kind of a program for doctoral candidates that kind of combines networking with a little bit of physical activity with some socializing, so that it's really kind of a project that can holistically support the researchers, but also in a way that kind of really benefits their mental health. So this was something that we we did, but we couldn't create these programs. So if you
Yeah.
kind of put yourself out there as a cost action, you basically attract the people who are doing something, or you can invite them to speak in your your webinar or your podcast or whatever it is that you can this sort of awareness raising activities, because a cost action is relatively fluid and who can take part. This is really a big network building activity. And so this is really nice funding for doing those sort of activities, because it really creates a big added value.
And now maybe also a little bit on the tips and tricks side for researchers. What can be done? What should be what they should be aware of, or something like that? Like lessons learned from your ReMO COST Action,
I,
maybe.
I think that for me, the big lesson learned is somehow to focus on personal interactions, whether it's with your supervisor or with networks, both with other colleagues in your institution and other institutions, or who work in companies or in practice close to your research. So that you should use your time as a researcher really to build. I mean, because we hopefully you will publish lots of papers, but sometimes the thing that kind of we as humans find the most satisfying is very often personal relationships with others. And so the things that you can do to foster that, and not everything that you're doing as a researcher has to be focused on research. You should sing in the choir, play football, whatever it is you do, find a way to do that as part of your daily life, because I think these are the things that nourish us, kind of whether you play music or whatever it is, kind of, and particularly for international researchers, this is quite challenging because you're in a different country. So you have to find a way to integrate somewhere else as well as to, and so this would be my main tip, is really to find ways to build space for something other than research in your life. Because I mean, we're all very motivated as researchers, but you should have other passions in your life as well. And so this is kind of and this is, in my experience, is what kind of really grounds you as a person, is how you can deal with how you can build a daily life that works for you.
That's very interesting. Maybe I will cite you one research. I was just stumbling on it recently, and you can comment on that if I may. So, if in 1917, while giving a lecture on science as a calling and a profession, Weber said that a successful career requires one to be not only a good researcher, but also a good teacher, then in a 1990 survey, only 10% of professors cited student evaluations as a significant career factor. 95% of respondents cited the number of articles published in scientific journals.
This is something, and this is how researchers are evaluated. Because this is that the EU, I think it was the EUA or Science Europe, did a similar survey about 5 or 6 years ago, where the two top factors for evaluating researchers were papers published and grant funding acquired. And so it was very clear that if you're evaluated on these items, this is what you will prioritize in your going forward. So I think this is, you play the game as a researcher as well, because you have to understand how that works. And I was also involved in the OPUS project with the Marie Curie Alumni Association, which is focused on reform of research assessment. And ReMO, we contributed to the consultation that led to CoARA, the Coalition on Research Assessment Reform.
Yeah.
So I think this is something that definitely, if this is how you assess people in kind of using, quantitative measures regarding number of publications, this is biased in particular ways, no matter what you have as a as an evaluation, it becomes a target and it can be gained in
Mm-hmm.
research. So this is
Mm-hmm.
something, and then it isn't a kind of an accurate measure anymore. So I think this is definitely something where if you evaluate people um, on any metric, that this metric becomes a means in itself rather than just becoming the way to choose the best people to do the best research.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess. Thank you for your answer. It makes me definitely think about it a little bit more, even. But yeah, what we are asking for, we are getting it. So, but anyhow, but the means are very different, you know. Might be how people accomplish it, also. Yeah, anything that you would like to share also, because we usually ask our guests to provide some resources that we can refer to and then put into this description of the episode, and anything else that you would like to point out.
I have been involved in the Pattern project over the last years, where we have
Yes.
developed training on kind of mental health management and leadership. And these trainings are available on the projects platform of the Learning Planet Institute, who are also a partner in Pattern. And I can provide a link to that in the
Very good.
contents, and that these have kind of guidance on responsible supervision, kind of how to thrive as an international postdoc, and kind of how to deal with career insecurity by preparing transferable skills. So I think that there are a number of courses available there in open access that can be accessed by the audience if they're interested.
And definitely many resources that are usually produced by the cost actions. Yes.
We have a
Yes.
YouTube channel. We have a where all of the webinars that we carried out, or nearly all of the webinars, are available. We also have a Zenodo community
Mm-hmm.
where a lot of the papers that were in our conference and so on kind of are available, so that we were very active presentations that we made, and a lot of resources there that can be accessed.
Very good. We will put all the links, but not to make it too overwhelming. Maybe on an individual level, what would you suggest better to use for researchers? Some results of your scientific endeavor, or you had also some kind of research on this topic that could be evidence based, so to say, actions that could researcher on individual basis implement.
So I, I think for me, it's really becoming part of a network
Mm-hmm.
where you can take part as a peer, and kind of this is very often the best form of peer mentoring. I know that that you have talked with Elena Garcia, who set up the REBECA program for
Yes.
mentoring. So I think somehow to become part of a peer collective or a group that supports your personal development is for me is the best way to progress. And sometimes, I mean, in research or in any other fields, is kind of to be part of a network is very often the next step in your career. Is kind of is how you interact with people and how you get supported by other people to go forward with your career. So I think this would be my biggest kind of gain from ReMO, and I know this is somehow how many of the things I've been doing over the last 10 years, kind of with Marie Curie Alumni and with ReMO and with other projects that I've been in. That one thing leads to another once you have built a network that is supportive and is creative and kind of productive.
That sounds great. And what about the institutional level? If we have any suggestions for them? Of course, to maybe to focus more not only on publishing and funding, but also some introduce new indicators that would help researcher to make use of or a little bit better show themselves and be evaluated, of course.
This this is, I think, at an institutional level. I think in my current job, I work for Hochschule Bielefeld, where we're running, it's a University of Applied Science in Germany, and we're running a postdoc program, which is to support postdocs to become professor at the University of Applied Science. And to be honest, that University of Applied Science is quite different than the top research universities. But there is a very, very big focus on teaching, research, but also contribution to the running of the university and the university kind of internal procedures. So that in some ways it's a very, very balanced assessment of who should become professor. So, and with particularly with teaching, because the teaching load is very high. So this means that you have to really show that you love teaching to make a career at the University of Applied Science. And this is something that I see within the work that we're doing in Bielefeld, that it really works, where you support postdocs to develop their career in collaboration with a mentor, because we always call our supervisors mentors. So this means that because it's a relationship, it's more a peer relationship. So that's kind of, that's really, if you have funding support that is focused on the needs of individuals, that this very often leads to better outcomes, both for the individuals, but for the institutions themselves. And this would be the way that I see it. And we have many researchers who are working in, so 50% in companies and 50% in the faculty, so that they're doing teaching, research, also experience and practice, so that they really combine a lot of the skills, they gain the skills that they need to become researchers who can really develop research with impact. And so this is something that I think for institutional practices, because that works when you have a federally funded project. But the minute that has to be funded by the institution itself using own resources, then it suddenly becomes very difficult, because if somebody decides at their end of their project, no, I don't want to become professor, I prefer to work in practice, because that suddenly becomes a problem. So I think it's somehow how to get national policymakers, regional policymakers, and institutions on the same understanding with regard to funding. I think is very important at the institutional level. Because you have to, this is not so easy, but I've been invited by the federal ministry in Berlin to go to a talk on go to a workshop on intersectoral collaboration, and it's in about 10 days from now. So I think I will discuss that more in Berlin. And so this is really, from an institution, the institutions, no institution is set up that they want to do they want to do all the wrong things, but they have their own constraints. And I think this is something where you have to find a way that policymakers and funders can work with institutions to set up funding instruments that really serve the needs of all of the players. And this is, at the moment, very often the researchers are not in the loop for those decisions. And this is somehow how to find a way that kind of sets up funding instruments that suit the needs of researchers as well. Sometimes if you build the perspective of the researcher into the loop, it can contribute something that will also satisfy the needs of the other players.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Brian. It was insightful. Yes, we will put all the links to the resources in the description of the episode. And thank you very much for your time and for being a part of EURAXESS Smart Talks.
Thanks very much, Darren.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the EURAXESS Smart Talks podcast.
We hope that you enjoyed this episode and can't wait to share more with you next time.
You can follow us and find more episodes on the EURAXESS portal, our social media profiles, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
This episode was prepared by hosts Daria Aksionova and Jovan Aranjelovic, editor Isar Peer, and is dedicated in memoriam of Professor Miroslav Trajanovic.